basically we have two categories of tools. We have the percussion tools, hammer and chisel, either a hammer or a mallet and chisel. And then the second category is abrasive tools, starting out with a rasp and then moving into abrasions of abrasive stones of different sorts. And scrapers are also abrasion tools. And in a certain sense, a drill is also an abrasion tool. So those are the two classifications of tools that we have. Now the sequence you go through is you start out with a point chisel. And then you go to the tooth chisel. And then you go to a flat chisel, and at the same time as the flat chisel, depending on what you're working on, you may use a round-headed chisel. You notice that since I'm carving common way in Italy, when you're cutting more finely is to hold the hammer like this rather than have a smaller hammer. Then on limestone. And then the sequence is to an abrasive, that is the rasp or a file. Stoneworking is most basically a form of percussion of hammer and chisel or axe and chisel. But there are different forms of hammers used in different areas. For instance, this is a typical Italian stone carving hammer. The metal is iron, untempered iron, so that it tends to be soft. This, on the other hand, is an American granite carving hammer, and this is tempered, and it gives a sharper blow than this one, which is for granite. Then we have wooden mallets, which are used in England and France, never, as far as I know, in Italy. And then we have round metal hammers, which are also, this is a French one, there are English ones, and then you have a certain amount of work with something of the form of axe. This is a quarrying pick used for hammering, for cutting out the stone. This is something that the Italians call the picchiarello, or a sculptor's pick. Hold it in two hands like this. It is no longer used in carving, but it was used at least up till the 14th century. And you hit like this. This is, for instance, is the one from Pakistan, and it's actually used for lettering on granite. This is what is called, this is a bush hammer, and this is not used generally on marble. It's used on stones which you're not going to polish, and it's often used as a finished surface on it. Almost any tool cutting edge that you find with a hammer and chisel, you will also find with an axe. And you can usually tell the difference between them because an axe is always working vertical to the stone, like this, never along the stone. Now, having dealt with the notion of the hammer and chisel, let's go to actually the chisels themselves. And the perhaps the oldest type of chisel is the point chisel. Roughly speaking, for instance, in marble carving, you probably take off 90% of the stone with the point chisel. It's the roughing tool. You have to think of stone carving as a little bit like peeling an onion. You're taking off layer after layer after layer, and you first go through several layers with the point chisel and then move on to the other chisels. Now this is a marble point, and it comes to a point. and you carve it holding it like this to the stone usually, or maybe up this far, but never like that. This is a granite point, and it doesn't even really come to a point. And granite, you are smashing the stone, so you're holding the tool vertical to the stone. This is a point chisel for use on a soft limestone, and I believe this is called a punch by the English carvers, and it's for carving in soft stone. Then, just for an example, this is a point chisel from India. Now, one of the interesting characteristics of iron tools is that this tool, when it gets dulled to a certain point and can't be sharpened on a sharpening tool, you take it back to the blacksmith, and he heats it up red hot, hammers it out to a point, and then cools it, and then tempers it. Now, what happens when you do that is that you gradually turn the point end of the stone into steel, because in heating it up, you're burning the carbon out of the iron and turning it into steel, so that without even knowing it, they in fact produce steel-tipped tools by working on it. An example, for instance, of the amount of blacksmithing you have is that I visited a workshop, a very traditional workshop in south of India near Bangalore, where they were carving in granite. And they had maybe 12 to 15 carvers, and then they had 3 people working in the blacksmith shop and continuously working there, so that the tools are being dulled down very quickly and having to be reworked by the blacksmith. So you have to think, whenever you see a site where there was a major amount of carving done, you have to think that there would have been blacksmiths there working as a specialty. Now, after the point chisel, the other chisel, which is an ancient chisel as far as we know, is the flat chisel. We don't really know the exact dates that tools were introduced, and you need to remember that although that stoneworking originally was using stone tools on stone. For instance, all of the figures on Easter Island were carved with stone tools, not with because they had no metal there. And anyway, the flat chisel is for working after the point chisel and smoothing off the surface. And the flat chisel exists in many different widths. And then it also exists, you get the round-headed chisel, which may simply be a flat chisel in which they've sharpened the corners off it. It may not have been made as a round-headed chisel by the blacksmith. I might say, as an interesting oddity about tools, is my first teacher in the United States told me that you should have your name inscribed on your tools, because he said good carvers steal good tools. Between the point chisel and the flat chisel comes the tooth chisel. Essentially, it's a more recent tool than either the point chisel and the flat chisel. Now, the tooth chisel is also interesting because it is really a creation of European, Mediterranean carving. The tooth chisel is not found anywhere, as far as I know, east of Persepolis in Persia. That is to say, there is no use even now do we find any use of the tooth chisel in Indian carving. Now, an interesting thing is the tooth chisel is in many different widths, and this, which is a tooth chisel, otherwise known as a dente di cane in Italian, or a dog tooth chisel. And one of the interesting things about this one is that you see its use a great deal on Michelangelo's sculpture, that he used it, for instance, the statue, the head of Brutus, the whole face and head is finished with a tooth chisel. And that's the finest one. It's very close to a flat chisel. Then we have something that is called a channeling tool, and it's thinner here than here, and it's used for carving channels, deep channels into the stone. And so it's a particular type of flat chisel. Another tool, which again is a Mediterranean tool, is the drill. And the drill exists now in two forms. This drill, which is a cord drill, it's also sometimes called a channeling tool, but a form of this was used by the Romans, and we have a couple of illustrations of Roman carvers working with this kind of drill, in which one person pulls the cord, and that spins the drill, and another person is pushing the drill in. This can also be done as a one-person drill by making the cord with a sort of a violin bow, and then the same person who is holding the drill can action the drill. But that's not as useful as having two people, because with two people you can move the drill around, you can cut channels, you can do all sorts of different things with the drill. An Italian marble worker I know told me that that doing the drill was learning for the apprentice who pulled the cord, was learning a schiaffo. That is to say, the cord has a tendency to jump off here. Every time the cord jumped off, the master carver holding this slapped the apprentice on the side of the head. All right, this is the other form of drill, is the pump drill. And basically you wind it up and then pump down, and that spins it. And this is the kind of drill that was used in medieval European carving. Now the drill is another tool that did not travel. That is to say, there is no use of the drill in Indian carving. And now you will find in Kerala some soapstone carvers who are using a drill, but they seem to have acquired it from Italian carvers brought in by the Portuguese. After the percussion carving, that is either carving with the axe or with the hammer and chisel, you start working in abrasive on the stone, and what you have is the rasp in marble, which is in many different shapes, and is what you use for smoothing the stone, but it leaves very slight scratch surface on it. And then there is also, for use on soft stones, there are various forms of scrapers. This is a French one, and it's for scraping out a slightly rounded surface. After that, you move on to abrasives. This is a produced modern abrasive, a rough abrasive, and then a finer abrasive, and then pumice. Now pumice is a finish pumice gives you a matte finish on marble or on the polishable limestones, and so the color comes out. Now one of the characteristics that's interesting of marble is that the color of the marble does not come out until you start to use the abrasives. If it's carved, it has a white looking surface even if it's a colored stone, so you need abrasives. Often the finished surface was not a gloss polish, but was a matte polished surface, and that would have been most likely with the pumice. The final polish, the high gloss polish, is something that is given now with oxalic acid, but there's a document from around 1800 which says that you burn goat's bones to charcoal, powder the charcoal, and rub the stone with water and that charcoal, and that creates your final high gloss polish. Now, one of the important things to remember about marble and polishable limestones is that they are always a natural polish, that wax is not a true, is never a true polish. I should mention that there's also the saw, and the saw is an abrasive tool. Saws cutting any stone except a very soft stone do not have teeth. They use sand abrasive, and it's a steel blade that is just a smooth blade that pushes sand back and forth across the stone, and that's how it cuts. Carvers knew basic geometry and could work all sorts of things using the calipers and a level and a square. And it was considered a very important part of carving. And for example, the tomb of Andrea Bregno, which is 1505, Very important on the tools that are shown on this tomb are the measuring tools for creating a sort of perfect measurements. One last percussion tool that is a modern tool invented sometime in the early 20th century is the air hammer. And the air hammer, you attach an air tube here and turn on the air on the hammer. The advantage with the air hammer is not that it hits harder than hitting with a hand hammer, but it hits so much more frequently. One of the most modern innovations is glasses. When I started carving in Carrara in the 1960s, the carvers never wore glasses. And every couple of weeks, a carver would have to be taken off to the first aid station to have a chip of stone taken out of his eye. We don't know what the Romans may have used to protect themselves, but they did not have glasses, and so we presume that they just took the chips out of their eye when necessary.